What is up, fellow sickos? I am Dan Favale coming at you with my certified fantabulous co-host, Mr. Grant Hughes, taking a break from sort of day-to-day reactions to look at more macro stuff. This is something we might try and do once a week, just these little mini things to give you a third full type episode of the week, if we can. No promises, but we're always, what did we call it, Grant? Hashtag we try shit.
Try shit.
Continue to try shit. We are behind on this, but we're going to react to some of the rookie extension or all of the rookie extensions that were given out and maybe some of their bigger picture implications. I will say, Grant, before we throw it on screen, have you figured out like what's the best way for you to frame how you feel about an extension? And it's not even just for the rookies, but for any team. And what I kind of mean by this is what I've kind of settled on is now I'm kind of looking at, okay, well, what percent of the cap is the final year worth now? And that's probably the best way, because you could look at it in general. Oh, the first year is this percentage of the salary cap. But I think even scaling out forward and saying, well, how is this contract going to age? But I'm also trying to view it through a lens of, as we're talking about this, I talk in circles. You're just super smart. I don't want it to be like inaccessible. We're rambling on or throwing too much information at listeners and viewers. And I think I've settled on that might be the best nutshell way, aside from the raw number, to say, okay, like this is, again, zooming forward, fast forward, what does this contract look like down the line? How might it age? That might be the number that I view as most important now. Does that make sense?
Totally. Because you got to find, because the raw dollar figures still just like don't compute sometimes because of the rising cap, and you're comparing it to older deals, that seemed like how is Scottie Barnes getting X, and when I can't even think of a good example now, and when like so-and-so signed 5 years ago to his rookie scale max, it was Y. It's like those numbers kind of stick in your head. So some kind of distant point of comparison helps. For me, I think we both view it, and this is a weird thing, but this is just how it is from the team perspective. Don't you default to that where it's like, oh, is this a good value for the team? It's sort of unavoidable, because otherwise it's like, if you go from the player perspective, it's like he got the most money that he could, therefore it's a good deal. It's like not.
I think because especially when these like rookie extensions are signed, it's the team that in all likelihood is taking the bigger risk, because like these players are never finished products. Right. And then it gets to, and with them, it's the only time you're taking not a risk is if you sign for less than the max. And so if you're a player looking at ahead to next season, and this is me being generous, we're talking like the Spurs, the Hornets, and the Nets can have cap space if they really want to. Like there are some other teams that could sneak in there. And we saw 0 restricted free agency offer sheets go out this past summer. And last summer, Grant, I think Paul Reed was the only player who signed one. And that was because the Jazz did that. I love it. I fave it.
They trolled. Yeah.
Shit. Yeah.
That was a weird one. No. So yeah, it's team perspective. I mean, really, because the numbers get funky, and like, I still am not, I think you do this way better than I do, where you look at what's the percentage of the cap. Like, just tell me what percentage of the cap this is going to be on an annual basis. And that at least keeps things like scaled correctly. For me, I just still kind of look at it in relative terms, where Scottie Barnes got this, Cade Cunningham got that. Now, a lot of these are going to be identical, but in general, just like because I'm just looking for what the market says a guy is worth. And did you pay more or less than that? And that's like kind of my starting point for evaluating these. It's not sophisticated or like all that inventive, but that's just how I try to like keep it straight.
Let's begin with the max guys. So I think these were the 4 that just signed their deals first, right? So Scottie Barnes, Cade Cunningham, who I have up there twice for some reason. I apologize for everybody watching. Franz Wagner and Evan Mobley was the other one. So they all got 5 years, $224.2 million. All of them can get up to $269.1 million, depending on whether they make an all NBA team or win DPOY/MVP. There is, with Mobley and Franz Wagner specifically, Grant, there's differentiation. There's like differential language that says their contracts can also increase to 246.7, depending on what happens. So I have 2 just overarching questions on this. One, was there any of these contracts that you felt most uneasy about?
I mean, you know what it is, right? Like, I think this is the consensus. It's Wagner's. He's proved the least of these 3 other guys of the 4 that got maxes. His ceiling seems the lowest, and he's also not the best player on his team. That doesn't disqualify you from a max. Right, and like Mobley's not either, I guess you'd say, because Donovan Mitchell just has been more decorated. But that's the one where the moment it was signed, it was like, really, like just going all the way there, huh? And then when you get a couple other guys after the fact that are signing for less than the max, I think it looks the iffiest of the four by far, right? That has to be the answer.
For sure. And who do you think has the best chance of getting to that 30% max, which would be 269 million?
I mean, I think you have to go Mobley because he could win Defensive Player of the Year. Like, I don't.
I immediately went to that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's just the way you get there. Like Cunningham's not winning MVP. Cunningham could make could be all NBA. I think everybody but Franz has a shot at all NBA here. But yeah, so just of those, maybe we should confine it to just those other three. We'll take Franz out. Of Mobley, Cunningham, and Barnes, do you just view those as like it's a three-way tie for like that's sensible, or do you differentiate any of those three and say like maybe one of them shouldn't have got the max, or maybe one of them could have pushed for a player option, which kind of used to happen more often than it does on that last year.
Yeah, don't worry. Patrick Williams got a player option though in restricted free agency.
Forgot about that.
I think it would probably be Barnes had the most leverage because he is the most important player to his team and has also just shown more than Cade Cunningham to date, in part because he's played more. If you're asking of those three, forget about Defensive Player of the Year. Who's more likely to make an All NBA team this year? I actually might. It's probably Mobley because maybe I'm skewed by the Barnes orbital fracture where it's always even going to have the games played at the end of all this for the Raptors, but he's playing on a good team. He has a chance to be the second best player on that team this season. Mm-hmm. So whether you want to frame it as overall getting to that 30% max, as of right now, though, for all these deals are currently projected to be worth about 22.5% of the salary cap in their final year. That number will tick up a bit if anyone actualizes the 30% language. I will say I will be fairly surprised if any of these four players wind up getting the 30% max. I just don't. I don't feel great about any of them making an All NBA team this year.
I think I agree with that. And as we always say, if any of them does, then that's a great problem for their team to have, because that means this deal was a good one. If the guy basically just proved that he could hit the accelerators in the contract in that first year.
Honestly, the only team really quickly that I think probably should have negotiated harder, like even if you thought, well, why not just use restricted free agency to our advantage? The Cavs weren't going to have cap space. The Raptors, you just don't have anyone other than Scottie Barnes. The Pistons, you don't get to treat players like this when you're no, we're going to make you wait, even though we're probably not going to have cap space either. It's Orlando because Franz is not your most important player. You had the ability to be flexible, but you decided in other areas, as we'll get to with Jalen Suggs, that you're not going to use that flexibility. So next up, as we go through this, it was really in no particular order. We're on to Jalen Johnson. 5 years, 150 million, no options. That'll be worth 13.25% of the cap in year 5. As of now, Grant, it looks like it will be it's going to be at a flat rate. So that's always, you normally see an increase or decrease. I feel like maybe Atlanta, did they do the flat rate thing with John Collins too? I think they might have.
That sounds right, actually. It's a weird thing. Usually, because it used to just be just standard, 8% raises or what, depending on the length of the deal and the type of contract. It was always increasing. Do you feel like maybe this is a response to some of the second apron fears of just like, okay, we just want to lock this number in so that we know what it's going to be going forward and we don't have to account for rising salaries? I don't know. It just felt to me like there have been more, well, the Magic do this all the time with like flat or declining deals, but there's been more, I don't know, inventiveness in how their teams are structuring these deals, it seems like lately.
I think so. In Atlanta's case, and by the way, I was wrong. They did not do a flat salary with John Collins. In Atlanta's case, they didn't even have the option really of making it declining because they're so concerned about the tax in these coming years. Flat is always interesting to me though, because okay, so you know what that number is going to be, and you know it's always going to be less of the salary cap moving forward than it was in year 1, despite not declining. How did you feel about like, okay, this was noticeably below what his max could have been? He has not started. Jalen Johnson has not looked good to start this season. I think they've given him too much agency on offense. I don't know if that's an issue of, okay, look at the personnel that's available. They're dealing with some injuries here. But I think they need to get back to streamlining his role where it's like get out in transition, put him the ball in situations where he already has advantages to go downhill rather than asking him to create or giving him the license to kind of not even operate from dead stops, but to try and initiate.
Yeah, this is one where up front it's like 150 over 5. Oh my God. but that's really just eventually going to be, by the time this deal is done, 30 million a year is just like, it's what 15 used to be in terms of, okay, that's a solid starter, more or less. So like, that's just what it is. I'm fine with it. I'm not going to read too much into his struggles early. I just think if you just, I care more about like the trajectory that he's on more broadly, and the fact that last year he showed several new facets, and I would expect him to just continue to get better. And like, I don't know. I don't think a max was ever really in play, but this is a significant deal that does bring some risk. But I think odds are he's going to be worth this. Just whether you have Trey Young there or not, which is kind of another factor I think in Atlanta's thinking.
I think it was probably a good bet by him, just based on how Atlanta has on multiple occasions now marginalized important talent around Trey Young. When you kind of look like what happened with John Collins, when you look at what happened even with DeJounte Murray,
Yeah.
in many ways. So I think this was probably, I think it's team friendly still, but I do think it was probably a smart decision for Johnson, who he is someone though that I think teams would have given an offer sheet to an RFA. Next up, if you want to take us through his footnotes, is another Jalen Suggs.
Yeah, Jalen Suggs also gets 5 for 150. Looking a little different though, and you've got it up here on the graphic. It'll be just under 12%. His salary will be just under 12% of the cap in the final year. So obviously it declines. He's going to make 35 million the first year, which is just inside 4 million of the max. So like, pretty close to what the best he could have done, at least in that initial year. But then by the end, he's down to 26.7 million, which is just like, that's a low number 5 years from now. So, 5 years. So if he stays exactly as good as he's been, that's a heist number. If he gets any better, then and that'll just come on offense. We've talked about it plenty. Then this is still totally fine. And I don't know that he's going to be a $35 million player in the first year of the deal, but he might be. And then after that, it just gets easier and easier for him to clear sort of the value bar. So I guess I would ask you, you're spending the same amount of money on Jalen Johnson, and teams and situations are different, but do you like one or the other of these $150 million deals more or less than the other?
Wow. It's probably the Suggs one, because I think he has the higher two-way ceiling, even if Jalen Johnson has the overall higher offensive ceiling. And maybe I'm skewed a little bit too much by the start of the season, but when you look at it declining, and also just this is Magic specific, so it's not a reason I like the deal better, but now it's, okay, maybe there's a year that you have to, because is this going to be a team, even if it's good, that's paying the tax? I don't know. But now can you suck it up for a year, but his deal is going to decline as you have Franz and Paolo Banchero kicking in. Does that make it easier to keep your core intact? Well, not just, we're going to keep those three guys regardless, but now adding talent around them or paying talent that you need around them. So I like that aspect of it for Orlando, but I think I'm curious to see what your answer would be. I think I like the Suggs deal. Let's forget about the salary scales, just in net value. I think I'm more confident in Suggs actualizing his value on this than I am Jalen Johnson.
I think Suggs is the safer bet, because you know that he can be a key player on a very good team, because he was last year. And that's true while he still has pretty obvious areas for growth, some of which I think are pretty doable. I kind of can't get away from Johnson having the higher ceiling. If he hits his, 95th percentile outcome, I think then Jalen Johnson is a two-way big wing / forward that can kind of do everything. And that player type just matters more than essentially a combo guard. I don't know. That's the other thing. Maybe Suggs eventually proves he is actually a point guard, which hasn't really happened yet. So there's upside there. But I think Johnson's the ceiling play. Suggs is maybe the floor play. And so, and with the declining structure, I think I still like the Suggs one a little better. But I do think you have to acknowledge that Johnson, because of the athleticism, size, position, there's a chance that's there's a better chance that that's one of the best value deals in the league in 3 years than there is for Suggs, I'd say. Even declining.
Jalen Johnson is more of an anomaly offensively for sure at his peak. But I will say with Suggs is we've seen defensive playmaking even this season from JJ. But Jalen Suggs has a way of defensive playmaking without it costing his team or being viewed as gambles. And that's a very tough line to straddle that I don't know if Johnson does well just yet. Next up, and this will be my guy, we have Mr. Trey Murphy, who is yet to play this season. 4 years, $112 million, projected to be 15.06% of the cap in year 4. What did you make of this one, Grant, I think I'm surprised. This is what I'm surprised at how team friendly it ended up being.
Interesting. I think my first thought was not so much about the deal, but what it meant for the team, because as everybody immediately jumped to is like, okay, well, Brandon Ingram's really gone now because you're not paying Trey Murphy this to come off the bench. I don't think it wouldn't be like an insane salary for a really, really good 6-man. But it does to me suggest that like the Ingram trade is just more likely than
That,
it
or the
was
CJ
before.
trade, I guess.
Or somebody. Yeah, right. You got to clear a little bit of room because this is now like
the
a
Zion trade. There it is. That's
for Scoot Henderson on draft night, right? That's what we're gonna do.
Oh man.
I think like the shooting is a premium skill, and the position Murphy plays, the defensive potential, the length, like all that stuff, just that feels like, it's worth, what are we at, like 20, 28, 29 a year, give her some, it's 27-ish. I think that's about right. I do feel like, don't you think that it presumes that Murphy will continue to be as efficient and effective as he's been over just larger samples of minutes against better opponents? Like this presumes that, right? Because if he's just what he was last year, and we love him, I don't know, this might be a little rich, right? It like improvements
really?
priced in, I think.
I think if he's just the same player, but he's locking more minutes and he's in the starting lineup, I think he's done enough to deserve this.
Okay,
That's interesting. This kind of feels, the number seems to reflect that the Pelicans don't, I mean, you lock him up at this number anyway. He is someone that I think he could have went to restricted free agency and might have had more suitors than Jalen Johnson or Jalen Suggs just because of how scalable.
yeah, universal fit for sure.
Right. But this does, when you almost look at the number and the fact there's no player option at the end of it, does it kind of signal that, all right, like what he is now on offense, like that's just what they consider him. He's shown that he can do more, but it doesn't seem like they're prepared to let him try to branch out.
I would say, yeah, well, and that's just kind of the player he's been, where he's a catch and shoot, catch and drive guy. He's not, handling the ball a ton. I think if he had more of that type of stuff in his game, this just like, there's no way he signs for this little, right? Or the offers are way bigger, or maybe he's more incentivized to go to free agency, because then you're talking about like a primary scoring, like playmaking big wing, that's the premium asset in the league. This does to me suggest, like, I do think he can just play more and sustain his like per minute stuff over longer stretches. And I think you're right. I think that this deal does sort of make it seem like that's the expectation, and not that he's going to be like, contrast it with Jalen Johnson's. It's like, that seems to price in, you're going to do some more like on ball stuff probably, where this doesn't seem to do that.
And also they didn't have the flexibility to do so. This is a team that probably could have benefited from a declining scale because of just thinking about, okay, you've paid Zion. If you wanted to pay Ingram, that might be a way to fit all of that in, but they don't have they're towing that fine line beneath the tax moving forward. So it is escalating. We're on to your guy, Moses Moody.
Just 3 years, 39 million, got done. Right around the mid-level range that was kind of hinted at that might be where things were going. 37.5 million, that's guaranteed. He's got 1.5 million in unlikely incentives, which, by the way, this is a new trend. I don't know if you've been kind of keeping up with this. Like, incentives might be just going away because they do count against the apron now, and they didn't before. So if you throw a bunch of incentive dollars into contracts, that's counting again. But you don't want that to put you over aprons. So even though if it's not a cap, it's just like that.
And I might have mislabeled it, so I apologize. His are likely incentives. They're considered. I would love to know exactly what those likely incentives are, because what about Moses Moody's performance is considered likely under Steve Kerr?
Yeah. Playing more than Jonathan Kuminga. So this is projected to be worth just a little over 7% of the cap in the final year. Obviously a very tradable number. Like we said about Murphy, Moody is just kind of a scalable, you're not scaling him up, but he does fit everywhere. He's just a 3-and-D wing that has a little more off the bounce than you might think.
He even fits into the poison pill provision neatly. That's how scalable he is.
Yeah, outgoing salary of 11.2 million, which fits into the MLE, which is now like a trade exception teams have if they didn't use it. So it's pretty. I wouldn't say this was a deal designed to be traded, but if you were designing a deal to be traded, it might look like this.
Right. Because my first thought was, because I was looking at the number and they're going to trade him this season, aren't they still? He locked down a payday and he's going to finish the season somewhere else.
Yeah. I mean, whether he plays more than he has or not is kind of like, I don't know how relevant it is, because this is eminently tradable contract that almost any team would be interested in having if he just continues to be either the 7th guy or the 13th guy on the war. Like that, somewhere else he would just be the 8th man, maybe better than that. And this is a bargain for that type of player.
We move on to Corey Kispert, who signed for 4 years, $54.1 million. There's a team option on that final year. At which point, if they pick it up, that's like 6.3% of the salary cap in the final year. He'll be 29 years. That can't be correct. I have to have a type. There's no way that's going to be his age, maybe age 27 or something. I know that Corey Kispert's older, but he's not going to be age 29 at the end of this, is he, Grant?
I think you're right. He didn't come in as a young guy.
So what do you have any strong thoughts about this deal? If I had to give one, I do think he actually does more than space the floor, and he's had some tougher defensive moments than I would have expected. And by the way, I was right about his age 29 season. That's wild. I still thought the number is fine, but when you look at the average annual value and it's more than Moses Moody, who I view as he's more scalable at both ends of the court, but it's also kind of about the same number. It's like they started it, they also made it. They didn't decline it, but his first 2 years will be about 14, and then it drops to about 13. So just the little extra flexibility there. I don't know. He wasn't someone who was going to get an offer sheet, and I don't know that you have to worry about him outperforming this. I'm fine with the deal. That must be just like, I understand it from both the player and team perspectives. I don't know that anyone made out more so than the other here.
No, it does. I mean, like, you have to view anything with the Wizards at this point. It's like, well, okay, so this was done with the intention of it being appealing as a trade asset, like, and then just this is the cost of shooting, but on the market. I don't know. I don't love it just because I don't know how much difference there is. I don't want to undersell it, but like, is Kispert a fundamentally better player than like Malik Beasley? I don't know. It's like you can imagine them occupying similar roles, and Beasley's gone for, was a minimum guy 2 years ago, making 6 this year. Doesn't have 4 years of security like Kispert does. It feels like a little bit of an overpay, but not to the point where you couldn't imagine some team deciding, yeah, we'll give up like a couple seconds and expiring salary for this guy to just come in and give us a spacer, right? Like that feels like what this is.
I saved what I believe the most interesting two for last, and they're from the same team. So we begin with Alperen Sengun.
This is the one you point to when you're criticizing the Franz Wagner deal and some of the other, like, you're not going to say don't give Cade or Mobley or Scottie the max, but like Sengun not getting the max, even if you want to say, oh, it's because he got the player option on the 5th year, that's still, I mean, 5 for 185, that's 17% of the cap in the final year of the deal. You could make the case that he has been more productive to this point in his career than any of those guys that got maxes. I mean, Mobley's got an argument, I suppose. Barnes, maybe. But like, this is just, it's a little under, it's almost $5 million under the max that he could have gotten in the first year of the salary. He'll be 27 for that when that player option hits. He's just like, great deal for the Rockets, and also kind of a good deal for him because he's going to get out a year early and be able to sign another huge deal sooner. I was just surprised that this got done sub max, just because of where the other max guys came in. Were you?
Yeah. When I saw Franz getting the max, that was kind of, well, why isn't Sengun? I know his role, like the Magic kind of identified Franz as a guy in year 1, and Sengun, it took until what, year 3?
Yeah.
For him to get there. It's a really good deal for them. I think it shocked me. It didn't shock me that the Rockets did this, because you looked at this year's free agency class, they didn't need to care about cap space, and you view it in conjunction with, they actually lowered, I think, Jalen Green's like offseason cap number by signing him. I think you looked at it and said, there's more of a chance that he's going to outperform this deal next year, and we'll have to max him out. So let's just save the money off the top now. And if we need to cut salary or just do everything via trade, which it seems like they're going to, in terms of upgrading the roster, not moving Sengun specifically. With him, though, and I think this was actually astute by him, I don't know which team of the cap space squads would have went out and tried to give him max money. There would have been signing trades on the table, I'm sure. But did he look at this roster as the Rockets? There's just too many guys. And is there just a chance that even if I'm playing a ton, my performance slips and my market value suffers as a result? Because they can't even find minutes for Reed Shepherd right now. I'm looking at Amen Thompson. I know that the raw shooting percentages don't necessarily show this. This dude looks like he's itching to make an offensive breakout while ending everyone's lives on the defensive end. And it's, oh yeah, like he's averaging fewer minutes per game than last year too. So I almost wonder, I know they have more of, there's not as many like bigs glutting up the rotation that you have him and Jabari and Steven Adams, and that's basically it. But with him, I think it was probably smart to do this more so, not even because of what the market could have been when you look at the cap space teams or lack thereof. I do view him as a central part of what the Rockets are doing, but there's so many guys in Houston that anything feels like it's on the table, good or bad, for these individual guys.
I had not thought about that because I really viewed him as sort of apart from all the other young guys they need to play because he was such a focal point last year. It's like, you're really different talking about the Rockets if Sengun is off the floor. Like he had such a huge role. I wouldn't have thought that like he kind of scanned the team and said like my numbers might dip and that might cost me. That's an interesting position to take. I get the explanation that I think in conjunction with that makes sense is he just wanted that player option, but I don't know, man. Like if I'm him and I'm seeing those other guys get maxes and I'm just like comparing my numbers to them, and like frankly, like he drove winning to, you know, on a 500 team last year. Those other guys, I guess Mobley to some extent, but like I don't know if I'm signing this if I'm him. I would just so like who's got, so it's Charlotte, Brooklyn, and San Antonio are like looming,
like the teams where, and by the way, not even all those teams are actually, they're just
right.
There's like if the Spurs were, hey, we will dump Zach Collins, we can have cap space.
Yeah, I mean like Brooklyn doesn't have it, like, so inserting Sengun on some teams might be tough because it's like, well, Sengun is just he's a focal point, he's central to what you do. Like on Brooklyn, that's fine because they don't have anybody that occupies that role. Charlotte's tricky because LaMelo's there and you want Brandon Miller to have the ball. San Antonio would be fascinating with him and Wemby there. I would.
Two of those teams, by the way, have Wemby's just the big in San Antonio, and then in Brooklyn they did pay Nick Claxton. That's maybe not someone who stops you from going to get Sengun, but Brooklyn is also trying to be bad for the next 2 years. So why would you add Alperen Sengun?
Yeah, it's tough when you start look. I would just look at now I've just talked myself into wanting San Antonio to happen for Sengun. Now it won't probably, but I don't know if I would have taken it. Although, like, I'm sure him and his agent, they just looked around and said, like, I don't know that there's going to be more. You might just want to lock this up. So good. Still though, super team for like my favorite of the 5-year deals by far, just because it's so much less than these other guys got.
Our final like actual extension that was signed, I find to be the most interesting actually. And I think it says more about the Rockets' longer term outlook. You signed Jalen Green for 3 years, $105.3 million. The first year salary, I believe, ends up being lower than his RFA hold was going to be. I don't have it in front of me and already forgot the number. They have a player option. So we mentioned like all these deals. Sengun and Green, I think, were the only ones who got player options on all these extensions. That's a little wild, but he has a player option on year 3, which will be his age 25 season. It's projected to be worth his salary about 19.2% of the cap. Now, people have said this is a deal that's designed to be traded, which I think is where I find it most like there's a chance that Jalen Green ends up being worth this money. But if you think it's designed to be traded, you're almost saying, well, then yeah, he absolutely needs to be worth this money. It's not happening this season would be my point. If he gets traded this year, the Rockets, he counts as $12.5 million in outgoing salary for them, and then $29.5 million in incoming salary for his next team. And that's just to bridge that difference in the middle of the season. Right. So if he's getting moved, it's in the off season when you have his salary coming in at like $33 million or whatever it winds up being. So that's where I throw it to you, Grant, is do you view this one, that this is a deal that they signed so that I know people kind of fret. Well, actually, let's start here. Let's say they don't move him. Are you really fretting over the possibility that you can't extend him off this? I think the number is high enough. I think what you've risked is, does he want to leave anyway because you didn't show that longer term faith in him out the jump?
So I feel like we got hit over the head with the take that this was signed because the Rockets intend to trade him like right away. But that was my first reaction was more that like the Rockets aren't sure justifiably that Jalen Green is a $30+ million player and a potential cornerstone or whatever, because he just has sometimes looked like that and most of the time has not. And this is the result. They're just, and I think he, like we've talked about with several other guys, Sengun included, kind of looked at the landscape and said, like, I don't know what's going to be out there. Why not do and get back on the market at 25? It just feels like this is risk mitigation by like everybody.
Yeah.
And that's how you get a 2+1 in a situation where it seems like it's almost always 4 or 5, right? For guys of like his draft pedigree and production, really, because the counting stats are still there, even if the efficiency hasn't been. So this just felt like the Rockets not comfortable going for 4 or 5 years at whatever that dollar figure needed to be. And Green and his reps saying like some of the things you said about Sengun, like, and all the like, minutes crunch stuff applies way more to Green than it does to Sengun because there's just more guards and wings to split the minutes up.
Yeah.
Just feels like everybody mitigated risk here. I don't view it as, now he could still be traded, but because so could everybody on the Rockets. They can't pay everybody, but I view it more as just like no one was sure they wanted to commit and the money's there and let's just do it for a couple of years and see where we're at.
And by the way, a handful of games into the season, this deal looks better for the Rockets than it did when he signed it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What I will say though, to the evidence that it was designed to be traded, I view that as, okay, well, that's an offseason thing. And there is logic to it in the sense of if they wanted to go after, they've been linked to Jimmy Butler. Sure. But if you want to go after anyone who's on like a big salary, you want other big salaries, because you could talk about, well, they could have just went the cap space route. There are a few problems with that. One, we very rarely see those lopsided trades where teams are using their cap space, bringing in this big name, and teams only want draft picks. Like there's always a larger contract, even in the offseason ones, the bigger trades, there's bigger contracts involved. The other thing too is you can only lament cap space if you thought they were just going to let Jalen Green walk for nothing. And so
they're going to renounce his hold.
Right. They were never going to do that. Yeah. And so they also weren't, what are the odds that they would have signed and traded him into a team that had cap space? Because if a team has the cap space to absorb him outright, why are you brokering a sign and trade basically anyway?
Yeah.
And so you get into that and it's, they do need bigger salaries to be traded if they want to bring in these bigger guys, especially if, let's say it doesn't happen next summer, Grant. Like they're still going to want, maybe they'll want more information on this group where it's Reed Shepherd will finish his rookie year and apparently might have barely played. Yeah. Ahmed Thompson will maybe wrapping up year 2. You have extensions to figure out for Tari Eason, Jabari Smith. If you want to make a move at mid-season, you definitely need, or want to be open to it, you need one of these bigger deals. Now, yes, you have Fred VanVleet, but this now, when you're looking at him at 40 plus, Jalen Green is more, he's closer now, what would be considered like a mid-end contract. So then these higher ends, and those are just, that's easy to fit in where it's, well, we can trade Jalen Green and other stuff and not worry about the math. Whereas Fred VanVleet, we attached him to another contract and now it's $50 million is all of a sudden in play. So I think I understand what both sides are doing here, but I will say in terms of the percentage of the cap, even the raw number, there's still for me to look back and say, Jalen Green is worth this. He shoulders the burden of proof here more than whatever you think the Rockets are doing. I think it's easier to understand than to say, Jalen Green is absolutely worth this.
Yeah, I think that's right. You want to talk about some deals that did not get done?
There were 3 notable ones, right?
Yep. So we got Jonathan Kuminga, Josh Giddey, and Quentin Grimes. I love that we've got Quentin Grimes in here among the notables. Part of that's just because we got a report that he did turn down a 3 for $27 extension from the Mavs.
Let's quickly, should he have taken that?
I mean, I hovering over all this is the lack of cap space out there. Yeah, but I don't think I'm taking that, because if I'm him, I'm just like, I know my role may not be huge here, although he has looked good. I gotta just see if I can get the mid-level. You
don't need cap if there's a mid-level team out there with an odd done. This has been beaten, so I think it was smart by him.
Yeah. You want to talk about Giddey? Giddey and Kuminga are both really interesting, but let's start with Giddey. So reportedly he wanted $30 million a year. The Bulls traded Alex Caruso for him, did not get picks back. So the thinking was that like, well, if you're not going to extend this guy, what are you doing? You just gave up Alex Caruso for nothing. I would argue that extending Giddey at too big of a number would just compound the error. So I'm actually okay with them saying, let's see what you got. We'll hold on to restricted rights and see what we think you're worth and what the market says. Is that where you're at?
Yeah, it's wild that you traded for this guy. You trade Alex Caruso to get this guy that you want more information on and aren't prepared to pay, and no draft picks from the team in the league that has all the draft picks. But overall, I don't think teams use, because it exists, whether you think it should exist, I've said this many times, it's a different matter. Teams should use restricted free agency more to their advantage. So I think the Bulls made the right call. It's just when you look at it through the lens of how they valued him in the Alex Caruso trade, it is a little curious.
And it's just like the 30 a year would just be a full stop no from me. Like, just because you're not You're not Jalen Suggs. You're not Jalen Johnson. Like if that's your comp, like that's wild. You're not there. I agree. I think restricted free agency should be used like much more aggressively by teams. And that's just the right call here, especially if the number was 30. Like, what do you even counter with if you're Chicago at that point? It's like 20. Like, I don't even know if I want to pay him 20.
Do you think they run, and every team runs this risk to an extent, but if you're probably going to be a bad team and he just puts up numbers, do they run into the risk of he put up good numbers, but it didn't necessarily drive winning? So then, or do we just pay him the 35 at that point that you might need to bump up? I think what helps though, which is why I think Chicago made the right call, even if I still don't support how they valued him in the first place, is that he needs to have another offer sheet out there. And you need to tell me the team that's coming in with even $30 million a year for Josh Giddey right now. I don't see that it exists.
Yeah, it's harsh. I definitely just say go out and see what you're worth, and we'll decide if we want to match it. Like, I'm not making the offer to Giddey, I don't think, until he comes back with nobody offered me anything, anywhere close to 30. I mean, the odds of him actually generating that kind of interest as a restricted free agent are pretty low to me.
Jonathan Kuminga turned down $30 million a year from the Warriors, Grant. How do you feel about that?
I don't really have any thoughts. I wouldn't have given him that if I'm the Warriors. I can understand why. I don't think it's rational, but I could understand why he wouldn't take 30, just because he believes, I think, that he's a singular star, a first option, like that kind of thing. Might have been a misread based on the depth of this team to think he'd get the opportunity to prove that this year. And he's been mostly terrible so far, outside of a couple flashes. He was good against New Orleans on the 29th. But yeah, like, this is a prove it season now from a guy that is in year 4. That's a little late to be proving it. But I would put it this way. I can imagine him commanding much larger restricted free agent offers than someone like Giddey, just because of the athletic talent, the sort of the little bit of mystery boxiness that he still has, which someone like Giddey really doesn't. But that 30 a year, I wouldn't have got there if I were the Warriors, and Kuminga probably should have taken it if it was anything close to that. But I also weirdly understand why he wouldn't.
And per Jake Fisher of Bleacher Report, the Nets and Sixers have interest in him. If the Sixers have interest in him, he's getting traded this year because they're definitely not going to have cap space. And the Nets will have cap space. And that might be where it's, who won't impact the tank, but fits our timeline and could be good. But I think the Warriors were smart not to give him that money. I understand what he's doing. He is the one to me that took the way bigger risk here.
Yes, for sure. And I would say too, I don't think I should say, phrase it this way. I think you can view the Moody extension like in relationship with this, because the Warriors locked up someone that, might be 80% as productive as Kuminga going forward. And they're going to pay him like a third of what Kuminga wants. So just as a value proposition and as like a, I don't know, insurance play, like just having Moody locked up at, somewhat similar position, it's like, okay, we don't need to extend anything past our comfort zone at all on Kuminga now. He can demonstrate he's worth a big contract or not. And then we'll just let the market decide.
Final thing, over under on his contract being $30.5 million in year 1 next season.
I'm going to go under, because I don't think he's going to get the opportunity with the team as deep as the Warriors. And I am less and less convinced that even if he did get the opportunity, he's that type of player. It could change, but as of today, I don't think he's a $30 million player.
I kind of view him on the same level as a Jalen Johnson. Maybe his ceiling could be slightly higher, but I think Jalen Johnson, when you look at the playmaking, he's got to be the more dynamic. Even the defense is the more dynamic player right now, no?
Oh, no, totally agree. Like that's why I would have given Johnson that deal. I've already said I wouldn't have given it to Kuminga.
Take us away, Mr. Hughes.
We will not be awarded any contract extensions for this effort, but I hope you all understand the NBA's contract extensions a little better. Thanks everybody for watching, for listening. If you have not done so already, rate, review, subscribe, thumbs up, leave comments on YouTube, join our Discord, check out our merch, links in the YouTube and podcast description for all that stuff. Tell your friends, word of mouth super helps us. And let us know in the comments what you think about some of these extensions. I'm sure there will be some differing opinions on whether any of these were good or not, except everyone should agree that Sengun was gotten for a steal. Thanks again. Shouts Frank. Apologies, Jared Allen.